Well, welcome to this edition of Good Business Pays TV, where we take on many different subjects related to small business. And today we have got a special edition. Actually, we're going to talk all about what micro business means and what micro business meant years ago, what it means today, and why it matters. We are joined by two people who know more than most about this. We're joined by Tony Robinson, who is an author, speaker, chair of Yorkshire in Business, and goodness knows what else. He's going to tell us all about that. And Ian Cast is the managing director of the Forum for Private Business. Hope I got all that right. What I'd like to start with in talking about micro business is, Tony, you've been talking about this for a very long time now. Tell us how the landscape has changed. Why do so many people want to run their own business, and how has it changed over the years since you started campaigning?
Yeah, it's changed massively. I mean, I was chief executive of an American subsidiary company in 1986. And at that time, and I started my own business that year, started the first of a number of businesses that I've run with my business partners. And that was around about the time it started to change a great deal. I mean, for example, there were under 3 million micro businesses in the UK, and today there are 5.2 million micro businesses in the UK. When my father was running his own micro business, there were 800,000 in the UK. So you can tell how, number one, it's increased a lot. And at its most productive, we've had nearly 1 million startups a year. And I really got involved and angry about campaigning to help micro businesses around about 7 or 8 years into running my own business, when I realized just how vulnerable all those startups were and how wrong the advice they were getting as to how can they survive and thrive in their business. So we had the ridiculous situation where maybe a bit like Silicon Valley, only 10% of the startups survive 3 years. In the UK, it was round about 20% for those that didn't get advice, and it was only about 40% for those that did get advice, startups. These are micro business owners. You know, people get into debt, Terry, because of having the wrong advice, the wrong playing field, and everything else. And then we did a lot of research through organizations I founded to help micro businesses. A lot of government money went into that research as well. And we actually found that 80% of startups could survive the first 3 years if they did 5 things. I won't go into that now because that's not the point. But the point is that the government have never, ever latched on to those 5 things. And therefore, what they do is normally every report will come in saying that the problem with micro businesses is an access to finance problem. So if you've got poor cash flow, what do you need? You need a loan, or you need to borrow some more. You need some investors. You're too small. You know, all the solutions that governments and the banks put at micro business owners is about creating debt. And that is the major problem, because there are only 2 things that matter to us as micro business owners. Me and Ian have been that for decades with our businesses. And we have a number of businesses. Ian will go on to explain about that as well. You know, we don't just have one business. We have multiple businesses. We're always starting up and creating new businesses. But the point is that if you create the level playing field, if you give the right support at the beginning, 8 out of 10 can survive and thrive. And 6% of all those, that's 5.2 million at the moment, Terry. If you help them survive and thrive, they'll become the employing businesses the government and the country want to see in the UK. So the whole trick is, and all my campaigns all linked to that one thing: help people to start up, survive and thrive, and they will provide all the productivity, all the economic growth, all of the quality of life and lifestyle that we want to see in the UK. It will never come from trickle-down economics. It will only come from grassroots up, as most of the countries in the world know and do.
And Ian, bringing it sort of up to date, I know that you and I have had a conversation before around government support for people like that perhaps just isn't appropriate, because they treat small or micro businesses perhaps in the same way that they do big businesses, but just on a different scale. Tell us about that.
Yeah, it's a phrase I've used quite a lot. I'm getting, well, small business is not big business, only smaller. It's completely different. The small business, they talk about SMEs. We were talking about this before. You use the acronyms. Well, the small business sector, if you look at SMEs, consists of everybody from, one person, a one-man band at the start, one woman band at the start, up to 250 employees. Well, that's a huge sector, massive sector. 99.3% of the UK economy would fit into that. So they've got this general pot that they call SMEs. And then government, unfortunately, spends most of its time listening to big business lobbying organisations. So when they talk about business, it's all very well talking to, well, we won't name them, but CBI, whatever it might be. They talk to these big business, people representing big business, and they'll put things into place, rules, regulations that they think will help, without realising that it has a completely different impact on on the really small businesses. And when you think about it, if we take it into reality, it's a person, it's a couple of people who've got a real passion for something, who've got a great idea. That's where it comes from. It's people, and that individual or those couple of people get together and start a business. And they don't have huge resources. They don't have an HR department. They don't have a legal team. I'm a bloody generalist. I know quite a lot about, not a lot, I suppose, but but most small businesses are in the same boat. We're trying to juggle all these different things. I'm trying to be the sales manager, the marketer, the HR director. I'm trying to keep on top of everything. And that's difficult. It's tough, but we do a pretty good job of it. We're quite robust. But government, and they need help with that. It's easy for me to criticise them. One of the reasons Tony and I are doing what we're doing, I'm the managing director of the Forum of Private Business with a number of members, the Forum of British Pubs, but also we formed this Micro Business Alliance because that we kind of sit under the banner of, because we saw during the pandemic that over 3 million micro businesses were just thrown to the wolves pretty much. Furlough was great. If you had 20 or 30 employees or more, great, you could furlough your staff. But if you were a director of a little micro business, you got very little, and a lot of people really, really struggled in that. And they're the most vulnerable. I think Tony's right. That's where most of the growth can come from these micro businesses. But they're also, in a pretty vulnerable state. The pandemic didn't help them. They haven't got any buffer in terms of savings. So all these things like high cost at the moment and late payment, which is raising its head even more, it's almost become culturally acceptable for these big businesses to hold on to payment for 90, 120 days. And that puts your most vulnerable at risk. So those little family, individual, those people that have got these great little businesses but are vulnerable, they're the ones that go under and suffer. And we need to be supporting and helping them more. So hopefully we can do a better job of informing government and make sure that the right kind of support gets put in their direction. That's the key to it, really.
So tell me about the Micro Business Alliance then, because that's been set up to help this group of people, clearly. Just listing out the help they need. And we're kind of a micro business ourselves, so I understand exactly what you're saying. But that's a lot of stuff, to a lot of help that's needed over a lot of different areas. Is the Alliance there to as a policy lobbying organisation, or does it create actual support?
It's there is quite a lot of support out there at the moment, anyway, with various organisations like the four. There's lots of support organisations out there, but what we really felt was we weren't getting cut through in terms of, I mentioned voice to government. If you look at the people that were being spoken to during the pandemic, it was usually the organisations that represent the larger businesses, not the small ones. And we'd be giving our ideas in saying, well, actually, micro businesses are saying this had helped them. And that was getting lost because at ministerial level, very often they were talking to the lobbying organisations that have got a lot of money and a lot of clout, and they've got a seat at the table. So really, the idea of the Micro Business Alliance, and Tony was the big driver in this, saying, look, why don't we all get together? They can't ignore us if we create one big group with over 1 million people signed up to it, which we're at now and continuing to grow. But we can help them. We can survey members. We can say to members, right, tell us your experiences at the moment. What's going on out there? What's happening in your sector? What are your challenges? What would be the solutions to that? What could you really do with? And try and help government, not embarrass them, not go into conflict with government, but actually be able to say to government, look, by the way, we've spoken to this rather large number of micro businesses, and here's what they're telling us in terms of the issues and the solutions, and start being really solution based and cutting through and make sure that the micro business voice is heard. Because I think, I'm sure Tony would agree, and everybody really that drove and signed up to this Micro Biz Alliance, the pandemic, we saw that it didn't work. We weren't getting the support that we as a sector needed, and we want to help make sure that doesn't happen again.
This is about being very constructive, if you like. We're taking the position that the 3 million excluded, which I campaigned for the full 3 years, and I'm still complaining for, was a mistake. It was an error of judgment rather than a deliberate ministers actually trying to lead as they did. I mean, we've lost 600,000 businesses, remember? So that's a high penalty, but the penalty in human cost of losing those 600,000 businesses is debt, and the fact that most of them that I know have had to get things like delivery jobs at below living wage, like gig economy jobs. Can you imagine that you've built a business over that number? So the waste of talent to the UK in policies that excluded 3 million from income support is terrible. So we're taking the position that they were misinformed, that they didn't have the right data, and that's why they created the 50-50 rule. Most of the suicides came from the 50-50 rule. You've got to have been self-employed at least more than 50% of the time. Well, that means that all of the startups were excluded. Every single startup in the UK was excluded because they're all one-person businesses, and they've probably had some income from a job during that. In fact, we tell people, while you're test trading, make sure you're doing it while you're still in a job. Or if you haven't got a job, get a part-time job, for goodness sake, while you're test trading and building up your business. So, and then they said paying directors by dividends, you're excluded as well. Well, the world of micro businesses, and I'm a director of a number of micro businesses, and that's how we pay ourselves. So we're taking the position that the government need help in creating these policies that actually affect us. So, if we take payments, which people talk as late payment, it is actually unfair payment, and it doesn't actually start with. I've had a number of businesses, as has Ian, and we've contracted with very large companies. We're very lucky in that respect. But 90% of micro businesses will never contract with one of those large companies. But somebody somewhere will be a customer of ours that has been in a supply chain. We haven't, let's say, but they have been in a supply chain, and it starts off with imposing standard or negotiated 45 to 120 days payment terms. It could be another large company, yeah? But that creates a 30 billion logjam, and eventually a micro business owner who is willing to pay, by the way, in an average of 7 days to other micro business owners in our community. I know lots of people that pride themselves in paying within 24 hours. And we don't need to know the person in accounts. And we don't need to actually, write out some terms and conditions. We just know that we pay all our bills monthly, for goodness sake. And therefore people need to be paid as soon as possible. And what is wrong with actually being paid as soon as possible for goods or services you've actually given? So therefore, we want to help, government always come back to, as I say, with the late payment issue. For 30 years I've been campaigning, they come back to, it's about the mistakes that we make on our invoicing or in the system, or with the not knowing the person in accounts or not negotiating the terms. But the people we're working with want to pay us as quickly as possible. Where it goes wrong is unfair payment as a culture, if you like, throughout the UK being read as par for the course. I'll give you one story of that, which may be why I realized it in 1986 when I was a chief executive, because I've never had a problem with a business owner-owned large company. Lord Sugar, for example, has been a client of ours. I've never had a problem in paying 30 days or less with a business owner large company, however big they are. Dorling Kindersley, Peter Kindersley, Amir Bose, Speakers, all of those companies that are business, they will all pay. Japanese companies all pay in 30 days because it's honor. It's a question. There are whole countries that won't allow paying 30 days and don't have a problem because it's regarded as fair and normal to do it. But when I was chief executive of this American subsidiary, I was put under pressure by the head office to actually move the dial, as we call it, to actually pay people after 60 days. Because we were paying on average within 14 days. We were growing rapidly, and our suppliers were tremendously important to us. And so we paid them just as fast as we can, which was in 14 days. And I was under pressure to do that. And that's when I first realized that the large corporates are willing to trash supplier relationships in order to maximize shareholder value, which is totally different from a business owner-led company, however big they are, because the loyalty of and the performance of their suppliers is how they build a business. And that is why paying 30 days is so misunderstood, because I've always said government should only intervene where there is market failure. I'm not in favor of legislation, for example, because the corporates, the big American corporates, don't work on that basis. They push the legislation out to the furthest ability to make as much money as they possibly can in the meantime. So if you take data protection, they will settle. The burden of data protection law goes on micro businesses. The large companies will settle. The government will settle all the health records that are being misused in data protection. They'll find a way of dealing with it in order to maximize shareholder value, basically, or stakeholder value. But basically, what we've got to create is a fair payment system. And paying 30 days was saying All government need to do, like with Tata, just about to put its electric vehicles, the government is subsidising that to estimates between 400 million to 500 million to get Tata in the UK. All they have to do is say to them, we want you to pay all your bills. If we're going to give you this 500 million, we want you to pay all your bills to all your suppliers all the time within 30 days. When we gave millions to a furlough company, we could have said, we want you during the pandemic and after it, in receiving all this furlough money, to pay all your bills to all your suppliers within 30 days. Now, that way, we actually get a fair payment method in the UK.
So how much is policy and how much is culture? Because obviously there's some things that government can do, and we've talked about the way that government...
Well, they can do that with any procurement contract. They've done that with health and safety. They've done that with hygiene. They've done that with people through investors in people. People used to have to bid for government contracts, and they used to have to show their equality policies, their diversity policies. All we're asking them to do is to show that they've got a pay in 30 days or less payment policy.
And so it's about government setting the framework for culture change to then...
That will immediately put our culture the same as the majority of countries around the world that do pay in 30 days or less. So, but that's, where there is market failure, where people will profiteer. Look at, and you can see it in everywhere you look. The supermarkets will profiteer. There is market failure there on food prices. The energy companies will profiteer. If you're a corporate executive in the same companies, usually American-led, investor-led companies, they are the companies that will pay the lowest wages, give the worst working conditions, and the executives of those companies will be paid 40 times, and the chief executive nearly 100 times more than those workers. There is market failure to create fairness, if you like, towards our people working in Britain. And paying 30 days is one of those things because, as you know, a third of our workforce are actually in micro businesses.
So, Ian, I guess the real question that's on my mind is, if you have a sort of wish list of 3 or 4 things or 5 things, whatever those things are, that actually need to change in order to support what micro businesses need right now, what are those things?
The first one's a fairly simple one, and it's very straightforward, and that's government to actually talk and engage more with true micro businesses, which I don't believe that they do. They don't understand the sector. So, you always hear politicians, oh yeah, I understand business. Yeah, no, you don't. Because you're a politician. So no, just because Daddy had a business that he set up or whatever. So, and not been disparaging to him, but they've got to understand the sector better. And that the only way you're going to do that is by communicating effectively and not communicating to lobbying groups with vested interests. Christ, I'll wheel 20 or 30 micro businesses down to Victoria Street. Well, they're not in Victoria Street anymore, but I'll take them down to the Bays department once a quarter and bring the departments in and come and actually talk to some real micro businesses. So the first one is communication. The second one that I can see, I'll just say something first before I give you the other one. Tony's mentioned something, you mentioned something. Culture. We have got a culture now where it's become acceptable, where big businesses, it's cheap money for them. It's great. They're not having to get money off the shareholders, and they're not having to go to the bank. They're basically using what is millions of pounds worth of late payment to fuel their cash flow. Their cash flow can be quite healthy of it. So it has become a cultural issue, and in order to change that cultural issue, they ain't going to go there voluntarily. They need a little bit of a nudge. So policy is needed to start moving that culture back. I believe that you need a little bit of stick now, you know, give them a bit of carrot as well, but we need a bit of stick to move them that way. So in order to do that, there's a couple of things that I do. One of them is we've got a prompt payment code out there that's a voluntary code, which, to be quite honest, isn't a code and needs to be rewritten. You know, Carillion had signed up for it and Carillion went bump. And a lot of these big businesses that are government suppliers sign up to the prompt payment code without any intention at all of paying people promptly. So first of all, I'd rewrite the code to be a proper formulated code that has strict, these are the terms that I want you to, that you've got to follow to be, but I'd almost have it like a kite mark, you've got that. And then, just as Tony said, if we're giving you money, start using government pressure to say you must be part of that code and you must adhere to it going forward if we're going to help you out with this. Now those two things, a proper code and government actually using that code as a little bit of stick to move the culture back, would be really helpful. So there's three things for you. One is talk to micro businesses more properly, not the supposed vested interest, lobbying companies. And I read something the other day that in the United States now, for every politician, every senator and congressman, there's 4 lobbyists for every politician. Well, we don't want to be getting to that stage. So stop listening to those and listen to the businesses themselves. Write a proper prompt payment code that can be adhered to with some real, strict guidance on it. And then make sure that, if you're supplying us as government, be it local, regional or national, you must sign up to that code and you must adhere to it. That'd really give us, some kind of meaningful change. And I don't think it's that difficult to do, to be honest.
And I guess if we did all that, Tony, we'd have happypreneurs, would we? Or
the whole point about a happypreneur, if you like, and the reason we created this philosophy in the book, and that I do the shows around the country, is because it's a bit. Entrepreneur is a fairly mythical character that's been developed by the media and Silicon Valley. It doesn't actually represent, 5.2 million of us that are micro business owners who actually integrate work with every other aspect of our life, if you like. That's one of the reasons that 8 out of 10 people want to start and run their own business. Tony Robinson, OBE, the business person, is exactly the same person as Tony Robinson, OBE Leisure. That is not the same in this mythical entrepreneur world, if you like, of the investor backed from a pitch deck and creating with an exit strategy. Happypreneurs, micro business owners never retire. They are so totally different. The reason they actually are starting their own business is not for unlimited growth. It's actually for the quality of life, and it's the freedom to do something that they love and are good at. Yeah. And so, yes, we give us an even playing field, and we will develop the businesses that government want to see. We are very productive in our communities, but just get that policy framework right. And I'd just add one thing to Ian's, and that is there has got to be a cohesive, understandable startup strategy like most other countries have for the UK. You've got to give vulnerable people support. Most politicians haven't got a clue how little somebody will earn in their first year, for example. When I say 12,000 would be really good for a micro business owner to earn in their first year of trading. They've got absolutely no idea. They've got absolutely no. I'm, a patron of a number of charities helping startups, young people that are on universal credit, starting up a business. 80% of them survive and thrive after 3 years. So they survive the first 3 years and they thrive and they continue to be micro business owners for the rest of their lives. Might not be the same business, as I've said, but they do it. You know, no, but nobody once has ever asked me since 2001, when we had something called the Council for Excellence that was government sponsored, and we created a startup support strategy. Nobody once since then has ever asked me, what should we do regarding startups? We haven't even got an enterprise allowance scheme in something as basic as that. We haven't even got one in the UK. So I'd add to the other factors that, you know, any one time there are 1.5 million micro businesses that I'd put in the startup category that need a level playing field and the right support. You know, so, I mean, some governments actually allow self-certification, if you like, because of the, you know, the number of regulations that put us off taking on employees, taking on that first employer and things like that. So you've got to actually treat within this massive segment, you've got to create something slightly different in policy terms for startups. And I'd love to see that.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think that we've got a helpline here at the forum, Terry, and you know we get a regular number of calls every day. People are ringing up asking for advice. If you distill things down, a good 80-90% of the issues come down to two things. If you talk to the micro businesses, is A, make it easier for me to do business, and B, give me a level playing field to operate on. They all, you know, they all say that. And Tony's right about, you know, I set up my own. You know, my first small business was 1997. I didn't have a clue whether the main difference of leaving a big corporate, which I did, regular wages every month. Then, you know, you two will be exactly the same. You start your own business like health. I paid myself just about enough to pay the mortgage and the basics. I was paying my subcontractors more than I was paying me. But then at the end of the year, you know, and if I'd had a bad year, tough, that was that year done. If I had a good year, I took some of the money in a dividend and I got a tax break on it. And actually, I deserved it because I was the one who was taking the risks. So then what does HMRC do? Let's go and change the tax rules so we can get more money out of these. So they started taxing dividends. They were aiming at the big shareholders. But by God, it hurt me because then I was having to put a salary in which I didn't know was coming in or not, and it really did affect the cash flow of my business. And that in itself is a good example of how, you know, looking at big business and the big dividends, how that impacted on little guys like me. IR35 is another one. You know, these people that are contracting out for a number of people, let's get more tax out of them. That didn't make any sense. And the you know, that's comes to the, you know, to the crux of it. You're not making a huge amount of money, and it ebbs and flows. That's the nature of being a micro business. No, you know, you're not constantly doing well. And the final thing about it is we don't have a lot of cash reserves. You'll be the same as me. We don't have a buffer, so we're sitting there on that line. Survival, actually, in many micro businesses' case, is about right. We're not into massive profits like the others. So if you're sitting there just about surviving, and then all of a sudden the cost of living goes up, you know, the cost of your heating, your cost of your other goods, and on top of that, people add in late payment and start paying you in 120 days rather than 30 days, you dip. You're into poverty. You know, the same happens with individuals who are ended up having to go to food banks. It's no good saying make savings. They were making all the savings that they could anyway, you know, buying cheap value brands and all the rest of it. You put those costs up and it pushes them into poverty. Well, all of a sudden you're doing that to many micro businesses and you're forcing them out, you know, and it forces them out of business. The government's response to that will be, oh, here's how you can get better finance. In other words, take on more debt to see you through that. That ain't the answer. You know, piling more debt onto people that are in a vulnerable position. There are better ways of supporting those businesses. And Tony and I feel very, you know, you can tell by the way we're talking, we're passionate about this stuff. It means a lot to us.
And I'd just like to say that the benefits to the community and everywhere we live of supporting micro businesses are massive to the government. So, for example, what Ian and I are talking all the time is, just give trickle up a go rather than trickle down, which hasn't proven to work. So, for example, on our high street, one of the things in Yorkshire in business, we've got 5 buildings of workspace and co-working spaces and various things. But a year ago, we actually bought a cafe, and we have got 30 pop-up shops in that cafe. And we got 30 pop-up shops, and we've just got a gaming cafe now and other cafes. And we're creating these cafe spaces whereby we're getting lots of micro business owners to be able to sell their goods in them. And they look fantastic on the high street. We're on the main high street in Scarborough. It looks fantastic. 7 days a week, busy as heck. And what that's led to is a community building out from that cafe. So, for example, we had 500 at an Inspiring Women conference. No government money, no contractors. This is just us as micro businesses doing things to help support each other. And that's the beauty of it, as is in the Happypreneur book. A lot of what I say I've learned from around the world as good practice. It's called enterprise facilitation. What you don't do is give people download advice as though they don't know what they're doing, and get a university to tell them what to do, or to get a big corporate executive to tell them what to do, or give a big contract to Capita or somebody else, and they'll create, What you actually do is you build a community like Startup Canada. Victoria Lennox built Startup Canada in only 5 years. Tens of thousands of entrepreneurs coming together in every region to actually help startups. And the benefits for your country is and communities and towns and cities of actually harnessing all this enterprise, creativity and innovation is fantastic for the quality of life. So there is a big payback for them getting the policy right, as Steve says, and nudge in the right direction, and we can do the rest.
Yeah, absolutely. Little story, I'd not mentioned this one to you. I don't think I had, Tony. I was very fortunate to get invited to one of the Palace Garden parties before the coronation. Bit of a name drop, there you go. But the point is, what I found interesting, I ran into 4 micro business owners when I was there who I know. None of them were there being recognised because of the businesses that they run. They were all there because of work that they'd done in their communities. And I found that very telling. Now, that was just the 4 that I knew. So that's people that have got micro businesses, but also putting stuff back into the communities, running different, events or different activities. And I just think, that paints a picture in microcosm that perfectly, what Tony's saying. They were there because of the stuff that they're doing in and around the community on top of running their micro business, putting stuff back. So they're a good sector for that. But that was quite a nice story.
Well, I think that we're going to wrap it up there, but this is a huge dose of common sense and wisdom here in this 40 minutes or so. And we are at Good Business Pays a micro business ourselves. And everywhere I go, and I'm sure this is true for many, many people, you can see these micro business people in action, whether you go into a coffee shop or a workspace or a park bench or a high street. So it's a growing group of people. It feels like they're not a group of people that really complain very much, but now they have a voice, which is the Micro Business Alliance, and thank goodness they do. And you've got some very clear asks as well, which is always good. So Tony and Ian, thanks very much for spending so much time with us today and all this good advice. And we'll do everything we can at Good Business Pays to support your mission. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you. Thank you very
Thanks,
much
Terry.
indeed, Terry.
Thank you.